In the ancient Zandari Realm, the nights were usually governed by the silver glow of the moon and the steady rhythm of the crickets. But one quiet night, the heavens cracked open. A glowing fireball, more brilliant than a falling star, tore through the sky and slammed into the earth near the village of Oluma. When the villagers gathered around the smoking crater, the heat was so intense it forced them back. Yet, in the center of the dying flames, they found a baby. The fire did not harm him. His skin glowed softly like warm metal, and his eyes shined with the intensity of two tiny suns. Believing the child was a gift from the heavens, the people of Oluma raised him with great care and named him Cory. As Cory grew, the fire within him grew as well. He was no ordinary child. The elements seemed to recognize him as their master. He could heat water with a simple touch of his hands and walk across the scorched, midday ground with ease. While the villagers were initially amazed, that wonder soon soured into fear. Cory was gentle and quiet, but whispers followed him like a shadow. People began to see him not as a gift, but as something strange and unpredictable. During these lonely years, only one soul stayed by his side. Inia, a girl who had lost her parents to the harsh seasons, understood the cold better than anyone. One winter, when a brutal frost gripped the village and the elders huddled in fear of the freezing dark, she found Cory sitting alone in the shadows of a granary. While others stayed away, she sat beside him. Cory, sensing her shivering, reached out and took her hand. A wave of pure, life-giving warmth flowed through her. In that moment, she realized Cory wasn't a monster. He was a hearth. They became inseparable, a bond of friendship forged in the quiet moments when the rest of the village turned their backs. Everything changed during a festival filled with torches, dancing, and the heavy beat of drums. Cory, swept up in the excitement, lost control of the heat vibrating in his chest. A sudden burst of fire escaped him, catching onto a nearby hut. The flames spread with terrifying speed. Although no lives were lost, the community was gripped by panic. Rumors spread like a sickness. The people of Oluma began to view Cory as a walking disaster. Their hearts turned cold, and the boy of the sun became a ghost in his own home. Time passed, and Cory kept his power locked deep inside. But true danger eventually came to Oluma from the desert sands. A massive desert beast, a creature of bone and scales, wandered into the village lands. It was not just a threat to people, but to their very survival. The beast destroyed the fences, trampled the farms, and devoured the crops that the villagers relied on to survive the coming dry season. The people were helpless. Only Cory stepped forward. He released controlled waves of heat so powerful they weakened the beast's armor, and finally drove it into the earth. His bravery saved the village from starvation and death. For the first time, Cory was a hero. People praised his name, children followed him in the streets, and the community welcomed him warmly. Cory felt a joy he had never known, the feeling of finally belonging. But glory is a fragile thing for one who shines too brightly. A few months later, one of the most respected elders in Oluma was found lifeless in his home. Fear gripped the village instantly. Before any evidence could be gathered, suspicion fell back onto Cory. The memory of the fire accident resurfaced, twisted into a weapon against him. Whispers turned into shouts of accusation. A mob gathered, fueled by a hidden malice. Even though no truth had been found, the people decided they no longer wanted Cory among them. They drove him away from Oluma and forced him into the unforgiving desert. While the crowd threw stones and curses, Inia stood in their path, her voice hoarse from trying to defend him. But her words were drowned out by the roar of the angry mob. Cory walked away heartbroken, carrying the heavy weight of a crime he did not commit.
Months passed. Life in Oluma continued, but a deep discomfort grew among the people. The truth finally surfaced during repairs on the dead elder's house. A piece of a broken knife was found beneath the floorboards. It did not belong to Cory. It belonged to a jealous villager who had wanted to ruin the sunborn hero to steal his status. When the truth came out, a suffocating shame filled the hearts of the villagers. Their protector had been innocent, and they had treated him like an enemy. Before they could seek him out, a new terror rose from the mountains. A monstrous creature made of moving shadows, a void seeker from the eclipse void, crawled into the valley. No weapon of steel, no trap, and no common fire affected it. Each night it crept closer, its cold presence withering the plants and chilling the blood of all who saw it. The seers of Zandari declared that only a child of the sun had the power to defeat a hunger that came from the darkness of creation itself. A group of elders traveled far into the desert to find Cory. They found him living in a circle of scorched sand, the desert winds moving around him like soft waves of heat. When he saw them approach, he rose to his feet. No words were spoken, but he saw the shame written on their faces and the desperation in their eyes. He did not return for them. He returned because it was his duty to the light he carried. When the night beast finally struck the village, bringing an unnatural darkness with it, Cory stepped into the center of the square. His body began to glow brighter than ever before, rising in intensity until he shined like a rising sun in the middle of the night. He gathered all the warmth of the Zandari Realm into his palms and struck the creature with a burst of pure, blinding light. The shadows melted away, and the monster vanished into nothingness. Oluma was safe. The villagers surrounded Cory with tears and apologies. The new elder stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Cory, you have saved us all. Please come into the hall. We have food, medicine, and the finest silks. We will build you a house of stone, and you shall stay with us as our protector forever." Cory's face remained calm and unreadable. He looked at the faces of the people who had cheered for him, then hunted him and now begged for him. "I saved you because it was right," Cory said, his voice carrying through the silent square. "But I cannot stay in a place where the sun only shines when people are afraid. You do not want a neighbor, you want a shield. A house built on fear cannot hold the light." He turned toward the village gates. Inia was already there, her pack ready, her loyalty to him more valuable than any house of stone. Beside her stood Jabari, the village's most skilled warrior. Jabari had seen the rot in the village leadership and knew that Cory's journey was far from over. "I have spent my life defending walls that harbor cowards," Jabari said, gripping his spear. "I would rather defend the light in the wilderness." The three of them walked out of Oluma and headed north toward the jagged Maw Mountains.
As the three companions stood at the edge of the desert, looking toward the dark, jagged peaks of the mountains, Cory turned to his friends. The air was already beginning to turn cold, a sign that the eclipse void was spreading. Cory's voice was a low, heavy rumble as he warned Jabari and Inia to turn back. He told them that his light was a beacon for the monsters, and that following him was a death sentence. But Jabari simply tightened the grip on his spear, and Inia stepped closer to Cory's side. They told him that if the shadow was allowed to grow, there would be no village left to dwell in, and no farms left to harvest. The threat was not just to them, but to the very soul of the Zandari Realm. They chose the dangerous road because a life lived in fear of the dark was no life at all. They traveled until the air grew thin and cold, and there they discovered the true horror. They found a void rift, a tear in the world where thousands of shadow cocoons pulsed like a dark heart. They realized that the night beast was merely a scout, and that the Zandari Realm was facing a threat greater than any of them had imagined. Cory looked at his companions, the woman who had been his hearth and the warrior who would be his steel. They had been rejected by their home, but together, they were the only ones standing between the world and the eternal night of the eclipse void. Thousands of cocoons hung from the cliffs, each one holding a nightmare waiting to be born. Realizing they were vastly outnumbered, the trio attempted a silent retreat to gather their strength and formulate a plan. But the shadows do not sleep. The monsters caught the scent of Cory's sun-born blood. From the crevices of the rocks, creatures of liquid night surged forward in a terrifying pursuit. The challenge was relentless. The ground beneath them became slick with shadow ink as they fought their way down the mountain passes. In the chaos of the retreat, a winged shadow beast struck from the darkness. Its claws, cold as ice, tore through Enia's side. She fell to the earth, the light in her eyes flickering as the shadow poison began to seep into her veins. Desperate and hunted, Cory and Jabari carried the unconscious Inia to a small, isolated village at the mountain's base. They found a healer, but as they pleaded for help and warned the villagers of the creeping doom, they were met with blank stares and mockery. The villagers did not believe in sky tears or shadow armies. They saw only two travel-worn men and a dying girl. They offered a bed for Inia, but they refused to arm themselves or prepare for the coming storm. At dawn, Cory and Jabari stood outside the healer's hut. They looked at Inia, who was pale and shivering under a mountain of blankets. They had no plan, only a grim realization: if they waited for the monsters to find them, everyone would die. Without a word, the two men left the safety of the village and began the climb back to the mall. They were going to find the source before the source found the world. When they reached the void rift for the second time, the sky had turned a sickening shade of gray. They were immediately cornered. A sea of shadowy monsters spilled out from the rift, surrounding the warrior and the hero. What followed was a legendary battle, an epic dance of steel and sun. Jabari moved like a whirlwind, his spear striking with the precision of a master, while Cory unleashed pillars of fire that turned the shadow beasts to ash. But for every monster they killed, 10 more emerged from the tear. The void was growing larger, feeding on the very conflict. Cory looked at the rift and then at Jabari, who was covered in wounds and gasping for air. Cory knew then that this was not a fight that could be won with a blade. It was a debt that could only be paid in light. "Run, Jabari!" Cory screamed, his voice cracking like thunder. "Go back to Inia. Tell her the hearth will always be warm." Jabari tried to protest, but Cory's body began to vibrate with a terrifying, blinding intensity. He was tapping into the very core of the fireball that had brought him to Earth as a child. He grabbed the nearest monsters, holding them back with a strength that was not human. Jabari realized then that this was Cory's destiny, to be the light that extinguished the dark, even if it meant extinguishing himself. With a heavy heart, Jabari turned and ran as fast as his legs would carry him. From the distance, Jabari watched as the jagged maw was consumed by a flash of light so bright it looked as if the sun had fallen to Earth a second time. A massive shockwave tore through the valley, and a sound like 1,000 bells rang out across the Zandari Realm. When the light finally faded, the void rift was gone. The tear had been sealed. The monsters crumbled into nothingness, vanishing like mist in the morning heat. But the silence that followed was tragic. The hero was gone. Cory had given every spark of his existence to save a world that had rejected him twice. Days later, Jabari returned to the small village. He walked slowly, his armor broken and his spirit weary. Inia was sitting outside the healer's hut, her strength slowly returning. When she saw only one man walking down the path, her heart stopped. She stood up, her eyes searching the horizon behind him, hoping to see a golden glow. Jabari reached her and stopped. He didn't have to utter a word. The silence told the story. Inia collapsed into the dust, her heart breaking in a wail of grief that echoed through the village. For days she wept, her tears falling on the dry earth that Cory had died to protect. When she had finally recovered her physical strength, she and Jabari began the long journey back to their home in Oluma. When they arrived, they did not bring spices or gold, they brought the truth. They told the villagers of the maw, of the void, and of the man they had once driven into the desert with stones. The people of Oluma listened in a suffocating silence. Their consciences judged them more harshly than any king ever could. They realized that the boy they had feared, the man they had falsely accused, was the only reason they still had a village to call home. Shame became a permanent resident in Oluma.
Cory's memory did not fade. His story spread like wildfire across every corner of the Zandari Realm, passing from father to son for generations. They told of the sun-born hero who was rejected by men but loved the world enough to die for it. And though Cory was gone, the sun always seemed to shine a little brighter over the village of Oluma. a quiet reminder of the selfless act of a hero who chose kindness over vengeance. The winds of the Zandari Realm eventually swept away the footprints of Jabari and Inia, and the stone walls of Oluma crumbled back into the red dust from which they were built. But a story like Cory's does not stay buried. It is a story that has a heartbeat of its own. It traveled across oceans, through the rise and fall of empires, and into the very fabric of how we understand heroes today. As the centuries turned into millennia, the specific name of Cory began to fade, replaced by new names in new tongues. But the image of the man with the gold in his skin and the sun in his eyes never truly vanished. When you study modern superheroes like Sentry, you start to notice echoes, stories humanity has been telling for thousands of years. Cory is one of those echoes. We see him in every hero who carries the power of 1,000,000 exploding suns, and in every soul who feels the crushing weight of being a savior to a world that doesn't always want to be saved. He is the original blueprint for the Guardian who is both a blessing and a burden. We often think these characters are the inventions of modern writers and glossy comic books, but Cory reminds us that we are simply remembering what we once knew. He was the first light to stand against the eclipse void, the first sentry to watch over the walls of humanity when the night grew too long. So, when you look up at the noonday sun and feel its warmth against your face, or when you watch a modern hero fly across a digital screen, remember the red sands of the Zandari Realm. Remember the boy in the crater who chose kindness over vengeance and duty over a home. The hero was rejected twice by men, but he was accepted forever by the stars. Cory's sacrifice wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legend that we are still telling and will continue to tell, as long as there is darkness that needs to be chased away by the light. The sun sets on the Zandari Realm, but the echo remains.